Hello, bruvs. We're back with Dagny, Juel, Przybyszewska, The Woman and the Myth. It's unfortunate that it has no jacket, but this book's kind of hard to get, and I requested it through a library service and got it. So be happy if you care about Dagny, which nobody apparently does. I don't care. I don't read books so people can like me. The Plays, Chapter 5. I want to tell my life's strange story. Perhaps not everyone will find it so strange. Perhaps the same thing has happened to others, but I have never heard of it, and therefore I think I am the only one who looks this terribly tragic. Mysterious fate in the eye. So begins the short story, Retta Viva, Dagny's first known work, which she dated Berlin, December 1893. The strange story tells of a man and a woman who at first meeting know they must live out their lives together, despite the other woman to whom the man belongs. They kill her, not with a dagger or a bullet, but by willing her dead. We simply knew with smiling certainty that she must and would die. She stood in our way. Everyone had to understand that. We did not need her. No one needed her, and so we let her waste away and die. The ruthless lovers feel singled out by happiness until one day the dead woman returns to haunt her living rival. And she never left me after that. Every night, every sleepless, fright-filled night, she lay by my bed. The dead woman becomes her destiny, while her lover remains unknowing and thus unmoved by her tragic fate. The events of this story, the coming together of the destined lovers, the death, physical or psychological, of the socially legitimate lover at their hands, and the haunting consequences, comprise the dramatic nucleus of each of Dagny's plays. The stronger, Ravnagard, Ravenwood, The Sin, and When the Sun Goes Down. Written in December 1893, Retta Viva not only anticipated the plays, it foreshadowed the actual events of June 1896, when Stasha's mistress, Marta Forder, committed suicide. Stash had also told the tragedy in his play Das große Glück, for happiness, written between 1894 and 1896, but not before Dagny had done it in 1893, just 4 months after they were married. We might speculate that marrying Stash and replacing Marta, who had already borne him 2 children, made Dagny deeply anxious, prompting her to write Retta Viva. We might also speculate that she wrote Ravenwood and When the Sun Goes Down, both of which contained the murder of the first woman, partially in response to the suicide. During the summer of 1897, when Dagny was pregnant with Iwa at Raleigh, Stash said that they were both writing long into the light nights. It was that December that he wrote to Prochaska that Dagny had completed 3 plays, probably Ravenwood, When the Sun Goes Down, and The Sin. The Stronger had been written earlier, prior to January 1896. It would be a mistake, however, to interpret Dagny's tragic formula literature. She did not write realistic plays about 3 people involved in a love triangle. She wrote mythic plays about the internal drama of one woman, a woman larger than life, who surrenders her innocence in favor of a darker, more demonic persona, closer to the source of her power as a woman. Fundamental to the action of each of her plays is the slaying of the inhibiting inner angel. The model she used was herself, and the myth she engendered. As a playwright, she created a woman who challenged the traditional notions of feminine identity at the price of severe internal anxiety and external ostracism. She used the triangle to symbolize the painful, incomplete rite of passage of the passionate woman seeking self knowledge and fulfillment. A friend of Dagny wrote to Ragnhild several years after Dagny's death. I remember that Dagny once said to me, "Everything that we experience of good, and perhaps most of bad, contributes to our development, and the intention must be that we shall reach completion." What do you got, bruvs? Neither Dagny nor her characters ever did. The publication history of the plays is itself indicative of her struggle for serious recognition. The Stronger was accepted for publication in Sam Titan's issue number 7 for 1896, the only play to appear in Norway in her lifetime. The Sin was the next to be published, accepted by Prochaska, to appear in Czech translation in Moderní Review in issue number 9, 1898. There was also talk of performing it in Prague, but no production materialized, save for a reading of the Czech translation at the city's Intimate Theater. Intimní volný javist, the Freeman Intimate Theater. The Free Intimate Theater. In 1899, The Sin and When the Sun Goes Down were published in the Polish journal Zaisi, and I'm sure I'm butchering that name, edited by Stash. He translated the plays and undoubtedly made the difference as to whether they were published or not. He always acted out of self-interest, however, and must have deemed the plays advantageous for Zaisi. What's up, bruvs? Though estranged from Dagny at the time of her death, he availed himself of the notoriety, writing the preface dedication to the small, posthumously published collection of her works, also called When the Sun Goes Down, and he translated Ravenwood, which appeared separately. Both the collection and the single play appeared in 1902. Stash owned the right to the plays and permitted Ravenwood to be performed in Krakow that same year. When Polish writer and actress Gabriela Zapolska tried to initiate a second production in 1911, he refused to allow it, supposedly heeding the wishes of his second wife Jadwiga, who was said to have been jealous of Dagny long after her death. In 1899, Dagny had written to her friend Marguerite Ansorge to explain that her books had not been published in Norwegian. She would have had to wait, clunky writing that is, in fact, until 1978, when the small publishing house Solum Forlag AS published Sinden Og to Andre Skuespil, or Av Dagny Juel, The Sin, and two other plays by Dagny Juel. Ole Michael Selberg wrote the introduction, one of the very few serious treatments of her work up to that time. He traced the history of the plays, analyzed their literary origins, and interpreted them in the framework of the 1890s. Yet what Selberg gave with one hand, he took back with the other. Intentionally or not, he ultimately traced everything about Dagny's literary endeavors, her inclination to write, her choice of material, and her philosophy of life back to Stash. He assumed that she wished to express herself in the same medium as her husband, and that she derived her central dramatic thesis, the dual nature, restorative and destructive, of erotic love from his thinking. Selberg was by no means wrong to establish a thematic and philosophical relationship between Dagny's writing and Stash's. Undeniably it exists, but her writing shares concerns not only with Stash, but with many of the major writers of the 1890s. It is a very different thing to say that she wrote in concordance with the writers of her time than to say that she wrote like her husband. The rejection of innocence. Dagny was a revolutionary playwright. Just how revolutionary she was can be best gauged by comparing her to other women writers of the 1890s. By virtue of her choice to write plays and poetry, not prose, she had already aligned herself with the literary avant-garde, made up primarily of men. By virtue of her choice to write expressionist plays about erotically driven women, she stood virtually alone. Norwegian women playwrights of the Fin de Sique, I'm just going to call it Sique, I still haven't looked it up and I never will, such as Hilda Garborg, Laura Keeler, Anna Munch, Alvid Prids, and Amelie Scram, tended to rely on conservative forms to convey an essentially feminist message. They wrote in the style of the realistic tendons genre of the previous decade, for they had a problem to debate: women's precarious position in a male-dominated society. For them, the roots of the problem lay in the disparity between women's and men's ideas on the one hand, and women's inability to assert their ideas on the other. Women, they suggested, innately had the superior value system. Men had the power. They fashioned heroines who attempted to assert the validity of their own ideas, independent of and as a challenge to male dominance. Structurally, this usually meant separating the heroines from their lovers. The more progressive writers empowered their women consciously to make the love relationship secondary to self-fulfillment, going their own way in an attempt to realize themselves. Few of these women playwrights of the 1890s thought so clearly or felt so resolutely about this very complicated issue, however. Often they accomplished the separation only by means of the death of their heroine after she had been abandoned by her unfaithful lover. But in either case, they made their point that it was deadly for women to derive their identity from men. The radicalization of women writers throughout the last 3 decades of the 19th century can, in one sense, be measured by their increasing tendency to distance themselves from the romantic love cult which equated a woman's worth with a man's desire for her, in part to emphasize the necessity and the desirability of a self-determined female identity. These playwrights intensified the difference between female and male behavior in favor of the woman, idealizing her and exposing him. She was the original innocent daughter, constant, loving, and altruistic. He, the seducer, lying, manipulative, and egotistical. Even those few writers who attempted to portray women who were capable of bad behavior insisted that these same women were intrinsically innocent. The myth of innocence, in other words, remained absolutely fundamental to their definition of a woman. Not surprisingly, the issue of a woman's erotic identity engendered great ambivalence. Traditionally, female eroticism was a taboo subject. That's an odd way of saying taboo, in as well as outside of literature. And these writers could only have been beginning to wrestle with it in the privacy of their own lives. Their plays show them clinging to a myth of innocence that would have been severely threatened by any assertion of female sexuality. In addition, in the public debate about women's independence from men, it may have behooved them tactically to de-emphasize sexuality to ensure the woman moral superiority. At the same time, in attempting to come to grips with a new identity for women, if long repressed, for women, it was obviously becoming increasingly difficult to deny an essential, if long repressed aspect of their natures. Ambivalence runs like a red thread through these writings, often surfacing in split characters, the sexual side of the heroine displaced onto minor players or indeed onto the man from whom she was trying to free herself. Right, bruv. Although these writers intimated that women were capable of sexual as well as spiritual love, they tended to confine the former to an assertion. The protagonist, for example, could be married or have been married or be living with a man, always an artist, in a free relationship. Symbolically, however, they kept their heroine a virgin and viewed her as man's potential victim. Dagny, also profoundly concerned with the problem of identity, chose diametrically opposed means to grapple with it. She embraced once again the cult of love, but in one stroke of the pen she modernized it, internalizing it and replacing romantic love with passion. She literally put eroticism on the stage in the form of her mysterious, magnetic, brooding protagonists, driven by their instincts and the heat of their blood. In effect, she reached backward in time to an old paradigm, but used it to accomplish things quite revolutionary. She asserted female sexuality. She portrayed women who were equal to men, rather than idolizing her women. She insisted on their right to be both good and bad. She wrote leading parts for women who defied sexual taboos and who committed crimes. Ultimately, she was the only Norwegian woman dramatist of her time definitively to abandon the myth of female innocence. Paradoxically, she did it through the romantic love paradigm from which most women writers were struggling to free themselves. Albeit with the greatest ambivalence, their difficulty is understandable, for the love paradigm, in its purest Platonic form, symbolized the very myth of innocence to which they still firmly held. The union of two soulmates, preordained by God, was contradictorily and simultaneously a sign of a woman's fulfillment and her innocence. It was, if you will, a way of achieving adulthood without a fall from grace. Dagny, in effect, used the paradigm to destroy the myth of innocence. Come on, train. Finish your song, buddy. For which it traditionally stood. Her women are driven not by spiritual, but sexual love. They are indeed predestined, not by God, but by urges deep within. Fulfillment of the love relationship means the loss of their innocence, and though they must suffer, ultimately they neither repent nor regret the loss. Dagny accepted the psychological consequences of female autonomy. The suffering female soul. If Dagny broke radically with the traditional notion of female identity, she found an equally radical new form in which to express herself. Unlike other Norwegian women writers of her time, she sought to expose the suffering soul, not the unjust social arena. In this, she had more in common with the male dramatists of the decade, like Ibsen and Strindberg, and certainly Przybyszewska, seeking to tap into the primitive regions of the psyche, to bring to life the inner drama ensuing from a rejection of internalized social and ethical norms in favor of the more vital, if more sinister, impulses imprisoned in the unconscious. Both Ibsen and Strindberg saw passion at the root of the instinctual drive, but then they followed its diversions and perversions into substitute drives for power. Ibsen, for example, created the fascinating Rebecca West of Rosmersholm, who usurped her mistress's power and then led the faltering Rosmer to their shared suicide. Strindberg created Henriette of Crimes and Crimes, who wreaked havoc with her erotic power and was then banished from the kingdom, For Dagny, passion remained a naked drive and the central theme of her plays. In Norway, she stood closest, perhaps, to Gunnar Heiberg, a member of the Schwarzviertel circle. I still can't get over why this lady continues to use the Schwarzviertel circle. In 1894, he published his drama, Balkanen, The Balcony, in which he asserted the inevitable right of erotic love to triumph. Dagny also stood close to her husband, for whom sexual love was the surest, albeit most painful conduit to the unconscious. But whereas he elevated sex to a satanic religion, indulging in a wordy emotionalism, she distilled eroticism down to a single powerful impulse, flowing through her protagonists and the lines of her plays. Her intense but spare style reflects the emotional concentration of her texts. Stosch, excessive both in style and mood as a translator, sabotaged his wife's plays, which were structurally and emotionally refined to reveal an internal world of inevitable tragic action and inevitable pain. Compared to the works of Heiberg, Ibsen, Strindberg, and Przybyszewska, Dagny's plays are radical distillations, both thematically and stylistically, of the internal conflict between ethics and instincts, ego and id, the battle taking place within one single character rather than among several. Ibsen, like Dagny, had, for example, long been interested in the angelic, demonic dichotomy in his women characters, but not until his last play, and I'm not even going to attempt to read what that is, When We Dead Awaken, did he really begin to strip it down to its symbolic psychic content. Anticipating that play and the later plays of Strindberg, Dagny wrote truly expressionist plays. She achieved what Sigbjorn Obstfelter envisioned when he wrote about his play Die Røde Dråber, The Red Drops. One might think that the dramatic conflict is that which takes place between the protagonist and the characters who surround him. This is not the case. What happens dramatically to him happens only in terms of himself. And that is what should be new and crazy, or new and good, and for a good actor, the interesting task. Whereas Obstfelter ultimately failed to translate his theory into real theater, Dagny did not. To this end, her sets are deep, amorphous spaces, and her characters, boldly drawn, haunt them like shades from a nightmare. All of them the various warring faces of the tormented dreamer. Save for the stronger, they reject any realistic dimension, and even that play strains against it. Ravenwood invites us to read it as if it were a sinister fairy tale. The set resembles a dark cave or tomb, and there is early talk of princesses and trolls. The sin and When the Sun Goes Down tell us to read them as if they were dreams, their protagonists lying down much of the time, dressed in white gowns, curled up like children, trying to hide from themselves. And if the characters and sets are the stuff of nightmares and dreams, so too is the action, propelled forward by large visual images rather than sophisticated dialogue. Exotic flowers thrown into the fire, a woman dressed like a white flame, blackbirds of death flying just beyond the reaches of the stage. The cast of characters is virtually the same in every play. The strong, troubled protagonist is torn between her fatal, demonic lover, the voice of her repressed passion, and the agents of innocence, a husband, a sister, wife, an old aunt, the internalized voices of traditional morality. Together they act out the same set of events time and again. In the stronger, Suri abandons Newt, her husband, for Tor, her previous lover. She knows that leaving her husband will crush him. In The Sin, also about two men and one woman, Hadassah deceives her husband, Miriam, by sleeping with the seductive Leon, then takes the life of Miriam to spare him the pain of her betrayal. In Ravenwood, Gunhild and Thor, unable to remain apart, caused the death of Sigrid, her sister and his wife, and in the parallel play to Rediviva, when the sun goes down, Ivy struggles with the dead woman she and her lover Finn have destroyed. Every play contains a ritualistic murder of the innocent part of the soul, preceded, accompanied, and followed by great internal suffering for the protagonist. Her suffering is ever present, ever felt on the stage, yet the meaning of the murder, or the loss of innocence, is potentially ambiguous, like dream content containing the possibility of multiple interpretations. Innocence may be interpreted as a spiritual and psychological good. Thus, the protagonist, having slavishly submitted to her powerful, instinctive, libidinous drive, is doomed to destroy a fundamental part of herself. She is a lost soul. Passion is at once essential and evil, and great suffering will be visited on the one who gives herself up to it. Ewa Cossack, in her brief allusion to Dagny's writing, interpreted all her works within this fatalistic context. The deepest love, Dagny reasoned, is that which leads to destruction and annihilation, and there finds its fulfillment. It was this love that tempted her. She considered it to be the only feeling in the world worth experiencing. Ole Michael Selberg read the plays in much the same way, detecting at their heart Stasch's Schopenhauer-influenced philosophy of amoral determinism. Driven to love whom we must, rendering moral categories inconsequential, we are nevertheless responsible for our good and evil actions. Doomed to live according to one law, we are doomed to be punished according to another. For both, i.e., the Przybyszewska, tragic situations arise in the intersection between the two naturally given necessities. The ethical law's merciless demands and the instinct's overwhelming compulsion. All of Dagny's plays can be interpreted in view of this principle of fatal convergence, in which submission to the instinct's overwhelming compulsion is paradoxically the way to discover and to destroy oneself. As a consequence of this interpretation, however, her protagonists must be viewed as slaves to their destructive passion. And indeed, sounds of this deadly determinism are heard throughout the plays. In the stronger, Tor says to Ciri, "Oh, how you long to feel my foot on your neck again." Finn reassures Ivy, and when the sun goes down, she had to die. It was our happiness that she walked into the sea. Your good angel led her, Ivy. Now she is out of the play. And Gunhild in Ravenwood cries out at the very end, "No one is guilty but fate. Woe, woe to the day I was born into the world." According to this interpretation, Dagny's revolutionary assertion that a woman has a powerful sexual identity is crossed by her counter-revolutionary assertion that it is by definition destructive and that she can fulfill it only through masochistic submission of herself. The Janus head. There are, however, compelling reasons to treat these plays like a Janus head, as with everything about Dagny, to turn them around and interpret them in a psychologically more subversive, more modern, and more positive way, restoring meaning to the killing ritual and independence to the protagonist. There are simply too many signs of defiance in these plays from the submerged energy that gives them life to the many metaphors they contain of the struggle for freedom, to confide them to a nihilistic interpretation that itself stems from the fin de sick. I don't know. Really need to look that up. I didn't know this lady was going to use that phrase 400 times. Innocence may be interpreted as a spiritual and psychological evil rather than plays about the submission of the self. They may be understood as plays about the assertion of an essential part of the self. They may be read as ritualistic soul dramas about the killing of the false or the good, innocent self, reared and so valued by society so that the real self, repressed by society, might survive. Long before Virginia Woolf called for it, Dagny herself wrote about killing the angel in the house. She knew as well as Woolf, however, that angels do not die unavenged. For Dagny, passion was the metaphor for the source of a woman's identity and the seeds of her power. Passion was mysterious, even spiritual, yet unknown and so dangerous. Her heroines interpret it as their truest but most perilous impulse. They heed it as if they were martyrs in the cause of their own fulfillment. Thus, in the stronger, Ciri leaves her good but jealous husband for a man from her past who knows and accepts her dark side. He says to her, "Your husband believes you're good. That's his misfortune. It's too hard for you to be good. It tires you. It feels like an unbearable yoke to you. I know your poor, evil soul, and I love it." And in the sin, Hadassah, the beautiful woman in white, commits adultery, what her good husband calls the sin against the Holy Ghost, i.e., the sin for which there is no forgiveness in Catholic doctrine. She makes love to a man who seduces her with his dream and who understands her, a dream of a black velvet abyss. It is as if the true selves of Dagny's women are kept alive in these dark dreams. It is where their fires burn, their flowers grow, and their stars shine. And they will cross society's sacred boundaries to tread into their even more sacred inner ground. Once there, they will repeatedly kill the good self, the self molded by society's agent, the mothering aunt, the nurturing husband, to exist for the pleasure and well being of others. The scenario is most complete in Ravenwood, whose cast of characters includes the dark, silent, inward turned protagonist, the imprisoned self, the light, talkative, outward turned sister, the socialized or good self, the lover to both, and the old mothering aunt. Gunhild, the dark sister, is shunned by Aunt Ossie, Ossie, I don't know how to say it, who thinks of her as supernatural and sinister. Sigrid, the light sister, is loved by the aunt as the ray of sun that shined gold on everything and everyone. Gunhild lives like a prisoner in her own dark house, unable to speak save through the strange flowers she grows in her private greenhouse. But Sigrid recognizes who she is. Whatever you touch doubles in value. You are like moonlight, you beautiful everything. The aunt, however, denies her value, and Gunhild takes her revenge, claiming Thor for herself, driving her good sister into death. In the sin, a counterpiece to Ravenwood, the beautiful Hadassah is dressed in white silk like the pure white fantasy in which her good Christian husband Miriam envelops her. He demands that she relinquishes herself entirely to him, attempting to convince her that herein lies her power. Do you think a woman has power, real power, when she does not give everything? Hadassah answers with words he does not understand, but which her dark lover implicitly did. I once dreamed of a deep black velvet abyss, full of flowers shining like stars and moons, flowers on tall, glowing stems. She would break out of her white prison. She would tap into her own dark source of power. He denies her that, and she poisons him. Tending their dark inner gardens. 20th century psychologists, like the Swiss psychoanalyst Alice Miller, have formulated that what writers have known and attempted to express for a long time, that children in our society brought up to be good have all developed the art of not experiencing feelings. That sounds like bullshit. The true self cannot communicate, says Miller, because it has remained unconscious and therefore undeveloped in its inner prison. The company of prison warders does not encourage lively development. It does say warders, right? All right. But Gunhild has tended her inner prison, her dark greenhouse full of exotic flowers. She says to Aunt Ossie that they speak for her. Do you see the ones that look like fever blotches on a sick woman's face, and those that look like frost flowers on the window pane? My soul's big speckled birds. They would love to fly to another world where space goes on forever, but they sit so tightly on their stems. They're bound so tightly to the earth, and they're suffering. Can you see that all my flowers are sorrowful? I've nursed them. I've nursed them all in my greenhouse. Don't you think that's better than all those words? And once again, it is Sigrid, Gunhild's sister soul, who recognizes their value. If you understand Gunhild's flowers, she says, you understand her very heart and soul. The pattern of the killing of the real self, the world of Gunhild's flowers, has been endlessly repeated, particularly for women in life and literature for hundreds of years. Dagny reversed the pattern in her plays, killing again and again the false self. Virginia Woolf's Angel, Aunt Ossie's ray of sun. Her heroines are all in prison, be it manifested in bourgeois houses, gloomy mansions, white gowns, sick rooms, or silence, but they long to break free, and images of their longing abound. The door of Ceres' house in The Stronger is always open to the sea. Gunhild speaks of her flowers straining to be free of their stems, and of liquid fire bursting through the crust of the earth and flooding the world. Hadassah, by virtue of the associations made by her lovers, changes from a woman dressed in white silk to a mermaid, a silver arrow, a star, and finally a white flame, as if she shot up from the sea through the heavens and was transformed. But Dagny understood that she, or any woman, would pay dearly for daring to destroy what society has wrought. Aunt Ossie brings down a curse on Gunhild. The last words you will hear from my old mouth that so often sang you to sleep when you were an innocent angel of God. I curse you. I curse you for all eternity. May your bewitched hell flowers cloud your mind and soul with their poisonous breath, so that you will never see the light and the sun. May you sink into the madness of depression. The curse is all the more terrifying since it, too, is spoken by one of the dreamer's own voices. She is internally rent asunder, her innocent persona dead, her passionate persona condemned by her punishing demon conscience. The curse is madness, and none of Dagny's protagonists escapes it. When the sun goes down, the play that thematically brings the cycle of plays to a close is, in fact, a portrayal of the visitation of the curse on the heroine, Ivy. The scene is a bedroom. Ivy, dressed in a white nightgown, is lying on her bed, desperately struggling with the memory of a murder. As in Ravenwood, the lovers, Ivy and Finn, have driven the other woman into the sea. Your good angel led her, Finn tells Ivy, but she has grown fearful of Finn, the voice of her passion, who cannot feel her fear. He accuses her of not loving him enough, if she can be so afraid. She begs him to stay with her, trying all the while to reassure him that her love is still strong, but he leaves her so that she might sleep. She is left to lie there, dying of anxiety, struggling with the ghost of the dead woman who presses against her chest and breathes poisonous air into her face. She is left alone and torn apart, beleaguered by the warring internal voices of the angry, rival woman and the passionate lover. She has no safe internal space in which to hide. Dagny appropriately portrays her as a helpless little girl afraid of the dark. All of Dagny's women have committed the same crimes. They have dared to be women. They have rejected innocence, rejected being good, rejected being children. At the same time, just as Ivy both embraces and shrinks from Finn, they love and hate, accept and deny the voices of their repressed passion. Their ambivalence is ever present. Even as Gunhild commits herself to Thor, she sees him as a vampire. Thoughts always circle around me like bats around the lantern. Your blood lives only on the desire you feel trembling in mine. Just before Ciri leaves with Tor, she says, I'm afraid of you. You'll trample me. And after Hadassah has slept with Leon, she cries out, I should love you, but I tell you, I don't know you. Crying out, nothing can have happened between you and me. To him, I beg you, I beseech you, say it isn't true. Say it was a dream, a terrible nightmare. But by the end of the play, she will reach for the poison and destroy the infantilizing Miriam, taking the consequences of her rebellious dream. Dagny's protagonists are literally trapped halfway between an old identity and a new one, as she herself was, unwilling to live with their innocence, their false self. They are as yet unable to live with their passion, which they interpret ambivalently as the most vital and the deadliest part of their souls. They are never, as in Gunhild's wish for her flowers, cut free, and they never truly flourish. They are in between creatures, afraid of what they have become, unable to be anything else. They feel in touch with their innermost core, yet they feel evil. They are filled with desire, but they lack exuberance for life. As mysterious as they make themselves, they exude emptiness as they move about the stage. Like Gunhild, they love silence because they have too many voices at odds and none with which to speak. They are powerful women in whom the helpless child lurks just beneath the surface of the skin. Tor says to Ciri, how I know this trembling around your mouth, like a little child who's trying to hold back the tears. Hadassah, like Ivy, is a fragile girl afraid of the dark, who lies curled up on the chaise lounge. I think that's spelled wrong, isn't it? With her face hidden in the pillows. These are mutant women, spiritually beautiful and monstrous, powerless and helpless, terrified and thrilled by their dark inner gardens. They have begun an inevitable journey back to themselves. Alice Miller has written, those who have spontaneous feelings can only be themselves. They have no other they have no other choice if they want to remain true to themselves. Rejection, ostracism, loss of love, and name calling will not fail to affect them. They will suffer as a result and will dread them. But once they have found their authentic self, they will not want to lose it. And when they sense that something is being demanded of them to which their whole being says no, they cannot do it. They simply cannot. They will not be willing to relinquish their authentic self again for any price in the world. That's the end of chapter 5. Any thoughts? Any thoughts from the thoughtless, bruv? What you got, bruv? How many more pages are there? I think this book's got to be already half over. And notes to the chapters are long as hell. So what is there? Basically, that's chronology. So 170? Yeah, I'm definitely halfway through. Which is good, because I have to return it on the 8th. Edvard Munch's hand-colored Madonna. If you're unaware, she was supposedly the model for that painting, among others, but Dagny, that is. There she is. That's the best picture of her. It's the only one where she looks attractive. The other ones where they call her beautiful, she looks, not beautiful. There she is right there. Not beautiful. She's not terribly ugly, but none of her sisters are exactly beautiful. See if we can, that's just kids. Minda, Blair, Juel, Edvard Munch's Fru Ragnhild Backstrom. It's kind of got a Winona Ryder look to her. Hans looks like a typical German. Let's see if that's her. Is that Dagny? Yeah, that's not beautiful. She looks like Susan Sarandon in her 50s. That's her sister, I think. And her husband Stosh isn't exactly a catch either. You can see why he practiced Satanism. There she is in 1899. I think she was 30. That's the face of a 58-year-old woman. Statue in Dacha. That's her there. She looks a little like a dude, and he looks a bit like a... Look at his heart-shaped head. Kind of looks like an assassin. Dagny and Christiana. There, she's not bad. Decent looking. There, she looks 70 years old again. Dagny at Raleigh in 1893. Literally, she died at 33, so yeah, she's like 25 here. And she looks ragged. Dagny Juel Przybyszewska, 1893. That again, she's in her mid-20s. I think that's maybe one more photo. Yeah, she looks awful there. She looks literally like she's 58. And she's in her mid-20s. That is not a beautiful woman. Which is not an insult to her, but they keep referring to her as a beautiful woman. Anyway, that's all.